Radhika Sharma and I'm in these gorgeous locales of Kananaskis. Kananaskis is the location where the G7 Leaders Summit is taking place between June 15th and June 17th. The global heads of the biggest economies of the world are going to descend in this place, including the United States President Donald Trump, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. It is a summit that is going to be overshadowed by the Israel-US-Iranian conflict. It is going to be overshadowed by the Ukraine-Russian tensions. It is going to be overshadowed by the Gaza-Israel conflict taking place in the Middle East. So stay tuned on NewsX World with me as I bring you the latest updates from the G7 Leaders Summit.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. A powerful 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck Peru just before noon today, shaking areas near Callao, close to the capital Lima. One man died in Lima when a wall collapsed onto his car. 5 others were injured, according to Peru's Emergency Operations Center. US President Donald Trump and other world leaders have arrived in Canada for the G7 summit, where the intensifying Iran-Israel conflict is expected to top the agenda. On the sidelines of the summit, Canadian Prime Minister also met British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. With Starmer, Carney is said to have discussed the tensions in West Asia and their support for Ukraine. They also announced further collaboration on trade and technology. They also agreed to strengthen defense cooperation. Ramaphosa and Carney are said to have agreed to enhance economic cooperation between the two states, with Australian Prime Minister Albanese furthering the partnership on their critical minerals was discussed. Both leaders vowed to deepen their bilateral relationship. Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will meet US President Donald Trump for the first time in Calgary on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Talks are expected to focus on tariffs and the US snap review of the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal with Australia. Now we are joined by guest for this discussion, Stefan Nagy. He's a professor at International Christian University, joining us live from Budapest, Hungary. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump says Israel and Iran may need to figure it out or fight it out. Is this a green light for conflict escalation or a dangerous abdication of diplomacy?
I think it's neither. President Trump continues to want to ensure that the United States does not get involved in new wars and that new wars do not emerge in other parts of the world. I think he believes that the best way for Iran and Israel to find a way to have peaceful coexistence is for them to have diplomacy and dialogue. Whether that will occur, that will depend on, again, the leaders in Tel Aviv and Iran or Tehran. However, I think it's important for us to understand that the United States and Israel, despite their differences on some issues, have an enduring relationship based on their shared commitment to democracy, peace, and development in the region, but globally.
And should G7 issue a unified statement on the Israel-Iran conflict, or are divisions between leaders like Macron and Trump stark?
Well, in reality, I think that all the G7 members would like Iran to halt their nuclear weapons development program, push back their nuclear development or nuclear energy development to one that is strictly focused on civilian activities, if that is possible. This is a unified position, and it's been the unified position by G7 members for more than a decade, if not longer. And I think that this is going to come out in the joint G7 statement. At the same time, I think that they recognize that Israel has a right to defend itself against a state that has called for the destruction of Israel over and over and engaged in terrorism and fueled terrorism throughout the region, including in the Gaza area, where on October 7, 2023, a vicious terrorist attack was launched on Israel, killing more than 1,200 Israeli citizens.
And according to how do we distinguish between state warfare and state-sponsored terrorism in this context, especially when targeting civilian areas? When both are targeting civilian areas and claiming civilian casualties.
Well, in the context of the Israeli-Iran conflict, it's clear that the Israelis have been targeting nuclear facilities and those facilities that house those scientists that actually have been involved in developing nuclear weapons. They've also been attacking those top commanders that have been involved in planning and projecting terrorist acts against Israel and the broader region. In contrast, the Iranians have launched an indiscriminate attack against Israeli civilians, and this is a stark contrast. And I think that it's not one that we should take lightly. It's one that we should understand that the nature of Iran and its leadership is to use terror as an instrument of foreign policy.
And could Iran or its proxies target G7 countries as symbolic retaliation, especially given the summit's clear pro-Israel leanings?
They could. I assume that after the initial attacks by Israel on Iran's nuclear facilities and that leadership that was involved in developing nuclear weapons, that the Iranian regime and its proxies have probably already made preparations for some kind of counter attack against G7 members and those countries that support Israel. Whether they'll be successful or not, I think that we'll have to watch carefully. But those G7 members after 9/11 have really invested in security, invested in anti-terrorism activities, and the new technologies such as AI have really fortified, I think, their position, not making them, of course, immune from terrorism, but dramatically reducing the chances.
And building on that, with missiles hitting cities and no ceasefire in sight, what can the G7 tangibly do to contain this situation anyhow?
Well, first, a joint statement of diplomacy in, again, condemning, I think, a growing conflict between Israel and Iran, dedicating their diplomatic resources to finding some kind of platform for dialogue that can, again, push Iran to denuclearize, but also stop Israel from continuing its barrage of attacks on Iran. And lastly, and ultimately, the G7 members need to continue to contribute to de-extremifying not only Iran, but the broader region, so that they understand that coexistence with Israel is the only path forward, but coexistence means respecting Israel's right to exist. And at the same time, Israel has to acknowledge that the broader region does have an interest in dealing with issues such as the Palestinian issue, because, again, the Palestinian issue is one of the wedge issues that has created tensions in the region as well. So on all sides, I think that it's important to cooperate, find ways to build dialogue, and use diplomacy as the tool to defuse and work towards some peaceful coexistence over the short, mid, and of course the long term.
And Building on to G7, is the G7's broader credibility on counterterrorism and global security at risk if this crisis spirals on their watch?
Well, this is not on G7's watch or on anybody's watch. This is on Israel and Iran's long-term, adversarial position towards each other. We should remember Iran has called for the destruction, the elimination of the Israeli state, not just for a year, but for decades. They don't recognize Israel's right to exist, and with that, they've been the primary predator and aggressor when it comes to the region and when it comes to Israel, and that includes its proxies that were based in West Bank, Gaza, but of course in Syria as well. Who should be responsible for defusing this? I think the Middle East in general has a deep-seated interest in defusing the crisis between the two, and that means likely the Sunni Arab states pushing and putting pressure on Iran to de-escalate by working with not only Israel and the stakeholders within the region, but bringing in the G7 potentially to add extra weight to the diplomatic pressure they can put on the countries that are currently engaged in crisis.
Thank you very